I want to welcome everybody to this show today. I've got somebody who he's been a mentor in some ways, a teacher. He's a teacher. That's what he is. And I met him about a year ago in an EMLT program that John Wineland was putting on. And his name's Travis Streb. And he is a phenomenal men's coach, men's work coach. And so first of all, Trav, thanks for being here today. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, man. I'm so happy we got to talk, and I know we had to book this interview twice, but I think it was
It'll be
hopefully
worth
worth the wait.
For sure. For sure. So,
Yeah,
so introduce yourself. Tell people who you are, what you do, and what's
yeah.
alive for you.
Well, it's funny, man, because I went to a party last night, and which I haven't been to for months. Most of the events I go to are events like you were at, retreats,
Right.
or I'm doing corporate events, things like that, where it's there's fun times and celebration, but it's in a different way. And I went to like a real going away party for a friend of mine who's moving to South Africa.
Mm.
And so one of the guys there he's a musician. His name's John Mason, and he plays it's like like a folk alt rock singer,
Okay.
and really talented guy. And he said he was telling me all kinds of stories about his rock star life. And he said, so I don't really know what you do, man. Like, what I know, I've been to your men's group, and I've heard a little bit about you from some people that work with you as clients. And I said to him, well, I was like, I don't know. It takes a bit to describe. And he's like, well, try it. Give me like the cocktail party version. So I said to him, I said, well, in many ways, I'm helping people see that they're going to die at some point, which is both, horrifying and morbid, but also, and so what action do you want to take today, given that this is all going to end? Like, what do you want your life to have been about? And so that's really where I spend my time. I work with men, I work with couples. I'm also a student of John Wineland, as obviously and David Data and others, but the essence of it kind of boils down to that. Is like, it's going to end. So it's not over yet, right? But if it is going to end, what do you want it to have been about? And how do I help you orient your life and your purpose and your relationship around this idea that death is coming, whether we like it or not?
So for you then, what is it, if it's going to end, what do you want your life to look like? What do you want to leave behind?
So I have this, I might butcher it, but it was actually a quote from our shared teacher from John that I read years ago in a Mind Body Green article. Came across it. And I think he wrote something like, let your legacy be your fierce beating heart. Nobody really gave a shit about the rest of it anyway. And so that kind of became the ethos of how I want to live my life. And so for me, it's about love, like the depth with which I could love my family. I'm married. I have a wife of, how many years we've been together? Been together close to 20 years, married for
20. Wow. Okay.
17 or something.
Yeah.
And I have two daughters who are 17 and 13 years old. So so love is an incredibly important piece. Like, I want to have been the transmission of love.
Mm-hmm.
I want to have been the transmission of depth, meaning that I'm someone that is not just seen to have depth, but is a human, a man of depth.
Yeah.
And openness. Like, I would like my life to have been a monument to those three things: love, openness, and depth. And if I accomplish that, I'll die complete. So,
Mm-hmm. And what are you doing to make that happen?
well, I mean,
How does that show up in your life, like on a daily basis?
yeah. Well, oh, you mean like, what's my morning routine to get there? Just I'm kidding.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, here's your 5 steps to love,
Right.
openness,
5 steps
depth.
to love
No,
and openness. Yeah.
it's a it's it's been it's just been a really beautiful unfolding. Like once I decided that, then I was like, okay, well, what kinds of things do I have to be doing so that I could die complete and live in this way, right? And the first piece of it really was about the relationship between me and myself. I had to really give that a hard look because that certainly was not a relationship of great depth or a lot of love, or a lot of openness. I had
Hmm.
a lot of closure towards myself, and um, the kinds of things I did were, I would say, not in the realm of incredibly shallow, but just fairly surface.
Yeah.
Um, and I spent a good chunk of time kind of in an office kind of job environment, and it didn't, and I was drinking a lot at the time, and I was still a parent and showing up, but I was just kind of like a good guy, like an okay guy.
Hmm.
And so that relationship had to shift. Relationships with my children, it's like I had like the I love you, but the really deep sort of
Hmm.
embodied love just needed
Yeah.
some cultivation. And with my wife, Rebecca, like I'd had to really clean up some things from the past, and not a lot of like huge transgressions, but 1,000 tiny cuts over a decade. And so that I could kind of clean up a lot of the past so I could be free and we could all be free to live in a space with more love and more openness, more depth. Um, Started surrounding myself with a lot of men, which I did not have growing up. I had a lot
Hmm.
of I grew up playing a lot of sports, but was um, I wouldn't say those were the deepest relationships I've ever
Right.
had.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then of course found some really incredible teachers along the way to help me to discover different parts of myself, find different ways to relate to the people I love in the world, to my work, to my own mission. And as a result, my entire, what I do for money, I guess you could say, is
Yeah.
completely different than even just a few years ago, but
Sure.
certainly vastly different than 10 years ago.
Yeah. So was it a gradual thing, or was there like come to Jesus kind of moments for you along the way? Or how did you get to that point where you're like, okay, this isn't working and I want to do something different?
I'll yeah, there were some moments for sure. One of them I remember when I was working in a corporate job. Um, Gosh, I don't even know how many years ago this would have been now. I don't know, 13, 14 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was I don't remember the year exactly, but I remember that I was cycling like a madman. Like I was racing road bikes at the time, and doing pretty well. It kind of
Hmm.
I've hit like the highest level of amateur, whatever the hell
Oh,
that means.
yeah.
And I was working in this corporate job, and it things were shifting, and I was being moved around different departments, and I had this incredible boss and a great mentor, two of them actually, and they were sort of trying to help me make a decision because we were at this point where they were like, well, look, we'd like to move you up in the organization. We see you doing this, but we don't have that role for you right now. So it might mean that you have to do this for a while. And I was like, well, I'm taking care of my family. I had good benefits, a decent salary, and I was riding
Mhm.
my bike a lot, had lots of free time. And, and I just remember being like, no, like I can't. They were like, yeah, if 18 months, 2 years, if you can kind of just keep doing the same thing. And
Mhm.
I'm like, no, I'm like, I'm just too young to waste those 2 years.
Yeah.
And, so that was I think, big turning point. So I decided to leave. I asked them to kind of let me go. I
Mhm.
basically orchestrated my own demise, and, went and joined an executive coaching firm, which is where I
Okay.
got my start doing executive coaching. Which I still do today, but looks a little different than it used to.
Yeah.
That's a big
Great.
one. That's a big inflection
That's a big
point,
one. Yeah.
I would say. Yeah, I remember my
Mhm.
parents, like my dad especially, my dad and my mother-in-law, God bless her. They were both like, you left, like you just quit. Cause I had like, especially I'm Canadian, right? So, you know, benefits and pension
Oh, sure,
plans are
sure.
like, like, and I had all that, right? They were
Yeah.
like, what do you, I remember my dad saying like, what are you going to do about all your benefits?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, you could, you can buy them, right? Like you can
Yeah.
pay the benefits provider to give you the same benefits.
Right.
It's just, there's no company paying the bill anymore. I have to pay
Hmm.
it myself. But, what about your pension? And I was like, so that was, that was a big, I think, big
Hmm.
piece. I found a great mentor many years ago who introduced me to my feelings, um, introduced me to, um, shadowy sides of myself that I was unaware
Right.
of, introduced me to the relationship I had with my parents, uh, and really, yeah, just set me on a great path that way. I hated him.
Yeah.
I mean, I really did not like. I mean, I paid him to mentor me, and
Yeah.
when I say I hated him, I mean I love him, and
Sure.
also I just hated what he had me do and the feelings he made me feel. But
Right.
um, that was I think, a really important turning point. And getting sober,
Hmm.
that was a huge one for me. I had never really thought, I never allowed myself to consider that I had an addiction problem,
Hmm.
but I did, and didn't take a lot of rock bottoms. It took more like a real, because it was easy for me to manage,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
wasn't putting on weight, so it wasn't having like a
Right.
big physical impact on me. I was riding my bike all the time, and
Hmm.
I looked healthy, but the amount that alcohol ran my life was, you
Yeah.
know, upon reflection,
Yeah.
um, pretty, yeah,
Yeah.
it was scary, man, to look back. So, um, trying to think, like, it's funny because most people are like, oh, what about the birth of your children? I'm like, I mean, of course, those are beautiful
Sure.
moments, but
Yeah.
it didn't wake me up like some of these other
Hmm.
things did. Um, and then, I think when I came across David Data's work, and then discovered when I met John Wineland, who you and I both work with,
Yeah.
another great teacher who's now passed, Guru Jagat, you know, those were moments that kind of confluence of events, probably,
Hmm.
I don't know, maybe 8 years ago. Um,
Okay.
that really set things on a very different trajectory.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
I didn't
those are,
realize you and I have so much in common. Like
yeah,
when I'm listening to your story, I'm like, oh yeah, that was me. I mean, I was in corporate America for 15 years.
he,
Um, Decided to make a transition into becoming a therapist, which meant going back to school. And, so, and then, um, and then alcohol played a huge role in my life. And I've been sober now since, 13 years.
wow.
Um, but same kind of thing. Like I was very functional, you know, like I was able to hold a job and all this kind of things. But what I didn't realize was like the impact that it had on me until I
Yeah.
started reflecting on it and realized how much, not just an influence, but like you said, I orchestrated my life around it and how much control it had over me. And really, like you didn't have a rock bottom. I had pretty significant rock bottoms, um, which I'm so grateful for. Yeah. But
Yeah.
that, I think that's just something that oftentimes as guys, we struggle in silence, you know, and we don't really know. I mean, somebody, like you were saying, would see you and wouldn't know that this was a problem or that you were having these difficulties with your relationships or internally relationship with
Yeah.
yourself and all that.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, it's hard to detect. Like, I mean, I went through an eating disorder as well, like,
Mm,
undiagnosed eating disorder that took a long time to unwind. And it's true, like, because on the surface, it's like, oh, look, it's a young, fairly successful white guy with a family
right.
who's, looks pretty normal.
Mhm.
And so you kind of get away with a lot.
Right.
And I think that I'm grateful that I had people around me that helped me, and that, working on that relationship between me and me, that that helped me discover like, oh man, like this is the core of my relationship with everybody else. It's like how I'm treating myself, which I'm sure as a therapist you
Yeah.
understand innately.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of that relationship with me and me, can you say more about that? Because you had taught on that at the EMLT program, and it was really impactful to me.
Mm.
Just kind of going even a little bit layer deeper of like how important the relationship I have with myself is.
Well, I mean, I'll start by like I didn't know it was even a thing, right? For most of my life. But I do remember I think it was 2017 paying very particular attention to it. I was um I had set off in 2017 to do this big fundraiser to raise money for pancreatic cancer research. And I set myself a goal to ride my bike up enough hills that it would add up to over 1,000,000 feet of vertical climbing through a year.
Okay.
And you can't see it now, but in behind me, there's a very large mountain called Mount Seymour. And I rode up it every day for a year. It's about 1,000 meters, which I know a lot of you are in the States. I don't know how many feet that is, but it's a bunch.
Yeah.
It is. And as I was doing that, I started realizing like, wow, I'm having a lot of conversations with myself on this bike, or as I'm like thinking about the fact that I've got to get up tomorrow and do it again, that really or don't feel very good. Like if I were
Mm.
having this conversation with a person that I cared about, I would consider it to be almost abusive.
Mhm.
You know, and a lot of repetitive thought pattern going through. So I kind of became aware that I was aware
Yeah.
in many ways. And that was where I first started to kind of realize I'm like, wow, I'm orienting a lot of my day around what I eat as well. Kind of where I became aware
Mhm.
of the eating disorder piece and how how much emphasis I placed on like, well, if you do this, you can have this.
Right.
Like there's always a quid pro quo
Mm.
between me and me. And then realizing how that's showing up in my parenting and showing up in my relationship with my wife. Like, so I won't belabor it too much, but that year really sort of solidified the importance of this relationship between me and me. And I look around at even today when something's not right with, with
Yeah.
me and the world, let's just say, we'll call it the
Mhm.
world means anybody, right?
Yeah.
There's something going on with me usually.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and it's strange to say it because I really
Mm.
don't like how individualistic we've gotten in the personal spiritual growth realm.
Yeah.
But often there's something here to look at when there's something out that's not going well.
Yeah.
And so that's really what it's all about. And I think the other piece of it that I taught about in the desert to you and a bunch of men was this idea that this is the longest relationship you're ever going to have.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you might want to tend to it. And
Right.
no, I can't say that today I have, the absolute pinnacle dream relationship I'd like to
Mhm.
have with me and me. There's moments like last
Yeah.
week I was feeling kind of sick and
Yeah.
part of me was like, no, man, just like push through. You're good. And of course, by Friday I had a cold.
Mhm.
I was feeling shitty. So,
Right. Yeah.
so yeah, um, there's, I think lots still, unfolding. Not like I've solved that piece of it, but I do think it's a really important piece for people to look at. Um, yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah, I think again, similar kind of stories and the relationship I had with myself for so many years. I said I had this bully that lived inside of my head that would just constantly take my lunch money, and beat me up and tell me I wasn't any good. And there became this awareness of one day of, I wouldn't let anybody else in the world speak to me like this, but I'm speaking to myself like this. And, and then I had this awareness, or it's like, am I choosing these thoughts? No, they're just happening. All right. So if I'm not choosing these thoughts, then that means it's not me that's having these thoughts. It's part of my brain or recording or something along those lines. And then by kind of, okay, well, if I chose to have a relationship with myself and treated myself like somebody that I loved, what would be the things that I would say to myself? You know, yeah. And that kind of started me on my path of finding more about like self-love, self-compassion, self awareness. And I think like you were sort of alluding to a little bit earlier, there's this fear that if I become so self-aware and so self-absorbed that everything else out there, that I become like this narcissist who's only concerned with himself. But what I found was the more that I love myself and have capacity increase the capacity within myself for love, the more I'm able actually to give love freely to others, because I have an abundance of love that I've generated within myself, because the relationship that I have with myself is one of love.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important practice though, is to do both, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
a lot, again, like, there's room for everything, but a lot of
Right.
what I see that I find, I don't know if it's problematic, but doesn't have a good ending,
Mm-hmm.
is where the realm of self-discovery or personal growth or even spiritual growth becomes so focused on the self
Mm-hmm.
that we forget to then turn that out.
Right.
And I just don't think it's worth it. Like, I don't think that that most people are going to die complete if all they have become is like this super self-aware kind of superhuman who's done all the
Mm-hmm.
biohacks and sort of
Right.
um, turned themselves into this incredible independent human. In
Mm-hmm.
my view, it's yes, like, understand self and then practice giving love,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yep.
and blasting it out to the people that are around you. That to me is the deeper work, because it's way harder to do. Not that
Yeah.
it's not, it is hard to practice that
Mm-hmm.
self-compassion piece.
I think it sort of starts there. It starts with that
Yeah.
self-compassion, but if it just ends there, right? And I think it's the difference between understanding that, I am separate and I'm connected.
Hmm.
And if I'm only loving myself, then, and I'm not using that to be an instrument of love, to give love to others and to serve and that kind of thing, then it just becomes sort of this cheap, I'm always just looking for more,
Yeah.
materialistic kind of things, or the way that I look. And that's where the sort of narcissistic piece comes up. But oftentimes you have to start with the self-love piece, because, you got to correct that first before you can begin to be an instrument of love for others.
That's a good way to put it, man. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think yes yes,
Okay.
and don't wait until you and you are 100% perfect.
Yeah.
It's like, as soon as you
Yeah.
have a sense of you and you, give it,
Mm-hmm.
give it, give it.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
I see that also, right? It's also another part of it where it's like, oh, well, everything has to be perfect with me. Like, I mean,
Right.
I coach people on relationships. I work with people on, on becoming better leaders, becoming
Mm-hmm.
better humans in the world. I have all kinds of shit come up all the time in my life,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm arguing with my kids this morning. It's a holiday here in where I live, right? And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
when are you going to do your chores, right? Like,
Let's go.
so it's not like I'm waiting until everything on my side of the fence is 100% clean before
Mm-hmm.
I want to teach. But I do want to make sure I've got a level of um, self-awareness and practice in me before I'm out there working with other people. And I think it's toggling between both,
Right.
and you know, never forgetting that we're all students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. We're always learning. I think, again, I would say the purpose of life is to grow, to change, adapt, become who you're meant to be. Um, and, and that's, you know, I'm not broken. I am growing. And as long as I'm growing, then alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who I am today is going to be different than who I am 10 years from now. That doesn't mean who I am today is broken any more than 10 years from now. It just simply means that I'm I'm always growing and changing and trying to learn and practice those kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very true, man. I have not lost my desire to be a student in any realm
Yeah.
except parenting. Got that all figured out.
You got that all figured out. Good. And then just about the time you got it figured out, it's time for him to leave.
Yeah, man. That's,
Yeah.
yeah.
So when
That's
you work
wild.
with men,
Mhm.
I know, and you work with men, what do you find like to be maybe one of the sticking points that a lot of guys that you work with tend to have where, it's this part of their life that isn't working well? Is there particular things that kind of come up more often than not?
Yeah, I don't know if there's any one thing. I mean, I think
Yeah.
there's one is the for the most part, right? I'm working with men who are um they've reached a level of success in their life where they
Hmm.
can afford not just not money. I run some free
Yeah.
programs too, but they also
Yeah.
can afford time
Right.
to spend working on themselves. So you've already got this subset of people that aren't scraping, hand.
Hmm.
So there's some bias built into the challenges I see that men have. But the first one is what I said the earliest, which is like a lot of them, especially people that have been outwardly very successful, they have often forgotten that they're going to die.
Hmm.
And again, like I know it sounds kind of morbid, but it's like, these guys in their 40s and 50s and they're like, oh, like when we first talked, they're like, oh shit, like
Hmm.
that's right. It is
Yeah.
going to end, right? So
Yeah.
that's one piece, and I think that really, um, it tends to, for men anyway, it tends to mute them. Like they become more reserved, they become more muted because they think that they'll have time to express all the things
Hmm.
they want to express and do all the things they want to do, right? So that's one big one. Um, the other one that I see is that they they've kind of they've missed their own initiation.
Hmm.
And I'll say more about that because
Yeah.
I don't actually think this is contrary to what a lot of people think. I don't think men in the West anyway are actually missing initiation.
Okay.
Like I think it's happening and they're just missing the moment.
Gotcha. Okay.
So yeah, maybe the rituals aren't there that used to be there.
Hmm.
But I believe men are going through events,
Hmm.
whether they're getting their hearts broken for the first time. I saw that there was a guy in my group a couple months ago, my men's group, 18-year-old guy, just love him to death. And he just had his heart broken for the first time. It's an initiation for a man
Sure.
to have his
Yeah.
heart stomped on. Right.
Yeah.
Um, Men who are, they experience some loss. Right?
Hmm.
Maybe it could be an injury. Maybe, I know, nothing debilitating, or it could be, but it's like an injury, or they lose a loved one, or maybe a grandparent dies, and they like that could be an initiation.
Hmm.
They they have a bad night out drinking, could be an initiation, right? And so I think for me, like people, a lot of men don't see those, like they just happen and they're like, oh yeah, that thing happened. And you're like,
Hmm.
do you not see how that helped to shape you? And it could have been a great initiation for you. And so I see that. So these things happen to men and they're like, what do I do with it?
Hmm.
And when they come into community with other men, they can then metabolize it and see it for what it is and realize like, oh, I could have used that to refine who I am as a person rather than define me or push it away.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I think that's a big one. And the other one is like, I really believe, certainly, I mean, if anyone's coming to find me, I mean,
Yeah.
again, it's a very biased sample, but the, they want to be better men in the world,
Yeah.
but they don't even know what that means.
Right.
Like they're not sure how. And
Like I know there's something, but I just don't know what
yeah,
or how. It's this elusive thing
yeah,
outside there that I feel like I
yeah.
should have. Yeah.
but even if I think about those three things I just listed off,
Mm-hmm.
they're still all related to the first one, which is they become aware that it's going to end.
Mm-hmm.
And, not again, it's as a way to like sharpen resolve
Yeah.
during life. And
Yeah.
I've seen that just be so potent
Yeah.
time and time and time again.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so the practices the things I'm taking men through are often, it's not just about like, remember, you're going to die. Like, it's just not what it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
teaching men to celebrate,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, Teaching men to love each other well,
Mm-hmm.
teaching
Mm-hmm.
men to love whoever they love in the world, their families, their partners,
Yeah.
regardless of who they love, to love them well, teaching men act, to act with definitive purpose, not
Mm-hmm.
like I know my life's calling purpose, but like I am going to take on this act, whether it's, stacking this pile of laundry or building my new entrepreneur webpage, but I'm going to take it
Right.
on with purpose and vigor.
Mm-hmm.
Teaching men um, to, to be vital, like to be alive, like you talked about, like to
Yeah.
be in a state of aliveness and be awake during their life. So
Mm-hmm.
those are things that help to, they're inspired by the idea that it's going to end.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I really like that. And especially I like your take on the initiation piece that it's not just one thing, that it's happening all the time.
yeah.
And I think that that's even from a perspective of growth and change, that an initiation is basically moving from, through a threshold from one room to another, you know, I, I've changed,
Mhm.
and if it's a ritualistic type of shift of, I was a boy and now I go through this ritual and I walk through the threshold and now I'm a man. It's these types of initiations happen all the time. And I love that idea that we're just missing them, and that even kind of reframing these things that happen to us, tragedy as an initiation,
Yeah.
as opposed to, oh, I got my heart broken. And hey, let's celebrate that, man. You were initiated. Good job.
It's an initiation. Yeah. And I think,
Yeah.
one of the, I do, I think there's a good health, there's a healthy amount
Yeah.
of some groups out there go, and men's groups go,
Right.
when they create initiation for men,
Right.
which is great. I think
Yeah.
that's really beautiful. I often just come across men who I'm like, I'm not your initiator. Like,
Hmm.
that's not the role I want to take on.
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah.
love to help you discover where you've already been initiated and pull the lessons from that.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm also coming across, maybe there are men out there who need initiation. They don't tend to show up on my door.
Yeah.
Um, but again, I also don't know if it's, you know, I think sometimes we try to create initiation for men and
Right.
we don't necessarily succeed. Like, we're like, oh,
Right.
well, now they're initiated. And it's like, well,
Right.
are they though? Like, are they? Are you
Hmm.
sure?
Hmm.
And, I also think it's an ongoing process. Like,
Oh yeah.
there's so like I have many more initiations to get through, and this year was the first time that um, we lost somebody in our family, in our kind of like my wife's
Hmm.
mother just recently passed away, and
Hmm.
it's an initiation. There's
Yeah.
grief to move through.
Yeah.
There's celebration.
Right.
There's sadness, and then also like I don't know how I feel, confusion,
Yeah.
but those are initiations too. Um, And as people around me go through initiations, like my daughter's graduating high school this year,
Hmm.
there's going to be an initiation into life.
Hmm.
Or that's also an
Hmm.
initiation for me, right? Like,
Right.
so
And your
there's,
wife too, that sort
and
of
yeah, right.
yeah.
Um, so I think they're all over the place. And I think it's a
Yeah.
question of looking for them and bringing voice to them. And that's why I do believe there's a great role for men's groups
Hmm.
in that. um, to help men share in those and have others see
Hmm.
them in it. because just like you and I are discovering the amount we have in common,
Yeah.
most men get into a men's group and start sharing, and it's like, oh, you too? Like,
Right.
oh, and it's like, cool. Like, I didn't know that, and
And I think
I'm
that's
not
what
the only one.
exactly, like that becomes then more of a connection point of, I've been suffering all my life thinking I was the only person that struggled with this,
Yeah.
and instead it's like, oh, you mean everybody does? Oh, okay. Like I'm not a weirdo.
Yeah.
And that's an
Yeah.
initiation right there.
It is. It is. So yeah, I mean, that's my,
Yeah, I like it.
that's my take on initiation anyway, for now. I'm sure my views will change, but now that's where I'm putting my stake in the ground. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. Well, talk to me about leadership as transmission. What's a topic that you have
Yeah.
some expertise in? Tell me about
Well, I
that.
mentioned it, right? I mentioned it
Yeah.
earlier. It's like, I want to have been the transmission of,
Mm-hmm.
and I think to me, this is where there's a difference between learning about concepts and then truly embodying and transmitting them. And I certainly have been guilty of the former, where I just learned. When I was working in the corporate world, and I like every business book known to man I had read, like Good to Great was on my bookshelf,
Sure.
and I'm dating myself here, but all of these, all these great writers, like, who I had read, and it all made sense. And I got really inspired reading. Like, I felt like, oh yeah, like I
Mhm.
want to be that kind of person. Right. And
Right.
Stephen Covey and Jim Collins and all these things. Right.
Yeah.
And I realized, like, and then I was teaching it a lot too, because I worked as an executive coach, and I was teaching it, and I was even teaching people, um, about things like executive presence and showing up,
Mhm.
and how to communicate effectively as a leader, and then realize, like, there's zero embodiment of it, like zero transmission of it, not zero, but like
Mhm.
limited. Like, I had
Yeah.
not actually taken it from the mind and installed it
Right.
into the body,
Right.
which is really how people feel each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as humans, taking, any gender out of it, we feel each other through the body, through the energetic field around us
Yeah.
in many cases. And so that to me is the place for us to work, especially in the West, where personal growth has been, spiritual growth too, has been very heady.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm not, we need theories, man. I'm not saying we should just
Yeah.
go and, do, just move our bodies around. But
Right.
both,
Right.
like an understanding and then the embodiment. And I think that where transmission comes in is it's the embodiment of knowledge. So you take a knowledge set. Maybe it's leadership. Let's just use it as an example.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Leadership has all these concepts in it, and different tools and practices and theories and approaches. Well, how do they show up though? Like, how
Mm-hmm.
do they get transmitted? We can't shoot them out telepathically.
Right.
We have to communicate them. So, as an example, well, what does it mean to have, let's say, executive presence? As it's one of those terms that
Yeah.
gets thrown around. Well, they can't just exist in the mind. Like, your mind could be very quiet or very still, which might be a nice trait to have as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
But if your body is lifeless, or if your body is jittery, or if your body lacks vitality
Mm-hmm.
or energy, let's say, there's no transmission of this idea of presence. Like, you're not really in the room. Or if you, I think I've seen this a lot. People learn the traits, right?
Sure.
Or they
Yeah.
kind of get, oh, if I do this with my hands, or if I look
Yeah.
at them this way, I have eye contact techniques.
Right.
It becomes a mental thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when someone's really present with you, even right now in this conversation, we're really present,
Yeah.
we feel it. I'm not checking like, is Chuck's eye contact moving around the screen? Like, it's,
Right.
I'm I'm feeling you and you're feeling me. Our voices say a lot, our bodies say a lot. And it's not a set of hacks.
Right. Right.
It's a
Yeah.
question of just dropping deeper into the body so that what we put out into the world is a clear signal. That's really that's the transmission piece for me. And I think that's the place for most people to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I teach leadership all the time, in the corporate realm and elsewhere. And I'm amazed at how smart people are, like how many theories they know. And they're like, oh, have you read this book? And I'm like, I
Yeah.
haven't. Like,
Yeah.
got nothing wrong with that book. It sounds great, but I
Yeah.
haven't read it. Um, but I'm like, but where is it in you? Like,
Yeah.
you're telling me about these things in this book,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I'm not feeling any of it through you. So I just think that's such a critical piece for us as a
Mm-hmm.
species, even to be working on. I mean, I'll limit it to the Western world, which is where I do most
Mm-hmm.
of my work. There may be other cultures and places around the world that have this kind of nailed. I don't know of them, um, but certainly, we'll call it, the corporate West.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, could really use it, and yet few people are willing because
Yeah.
the work it takes is different work. Um, you go into a corporate setting and you're like, well, you'll need to breathe a little deeper.
Mm.
And they're like, oh, no, no, no. Like,
No, give me some tips and
yeah,
tricks on how I can have
where's
executive.
the 5-step Harvard Business Review article? I'm like,
Right.
well,
Yeah.
it's probably going to take you about a year to learn how to breathe properly if you do it every day and you do it well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then it's going to take you a little longer to start dropping a little lower into your body. And like, so you could actually
Mm-hmm.
feel your feet on the ground while you're walking around. And then
Mm-hmm.
so it could be, a couple or 3 years before you really kind of back inside your own body. And
Yeah.
people are like, nah, I
No, I want a
like
solution.
yeah, give me the 6-month program to,
Right.
20 minutes a day. So,
Right.
I think
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the only challenge with it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think it kind of, when I think about wisdom, being more than just knowledge, you can know something, but to be able to transmute that to another person, like
Yeah.
that's where true wisdom comes in. I mean, you feel that person, you feel their energy. They walk into the room and you can tell they're not faking it. That is something that like you said, it's an embodiment practice
Yeah.
of you feel that energy from the other person to a point of like, no, I want that. What do I have to do to get that?
Yeah.
And there's not 5 points to it. It's a practice. It's a thing of like, yeah, the way you get there is you start practicing deep breath work. You start practicing presence. You start practicing meditation and
Yeah.
embodiment work and that kind of thing. And that's
Transmitting love through your body.
love. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's true, man. As you're saying this, I'm realizing like that's how I have chosen my teachers
Hmm. Right.
is through what they're transmitting,
What they're
right?
transmitting. Yeah. The energy that
Very
they're
few of
bringing.
them have like the accolades or like the, 9
Right.
letters after their names, right? And
Hmm.
yet you walk into the room and you're like, oh, that,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I see it, you know, I
Mm-hmm.
see it all the time. And I think it's a miss. I just think it's kind of it's a missed area, but I'm
Hmm.
happy to be playing in there. And
Right.
I'll stand by it until I decide that that problem seems to be solved.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that that's such a great way to kind of put that in terms of, and it's really easy to kind of get into like the woo woo energetic law of attraction, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's really about, and like you said, we feel somebody else. You're standing next to somebody and you can feel them, and you can feel oftentimes, and I also think we kind of tend to ignore that. But once you start tuning into it, then you can really
Yeah.
feel what's going on with somebody. You can tell right away, oh, this person they're hurting, or they're grieving, or they're, you know, just
They're having a great
numb.
day. This
They're having a
person's
great
fired
day.
up.
Yeah. They're fired up.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You feel that by the energy that they bring into it.
Yeah.
And I think that
But that like what you're talking about
yeah.
requires two things though. it
Okay.
requires sensitivity and awareness.
Yes.
So even, again, even through the field of virtual world, right? Through
Hmm.
Zoom or whatever
Right.
platform you're on, right? To feel someone requires sensitivity and awareness. We have to be aware of what's happening around us and inside of ourselves, right? So that usually requires some training.
Hmm.
Sensitivity requires that we can actually feel things. And, if I think about the two things I'm teaching and training most, not always saying these words, but what
Hmm.
I'm working on with, with men, with women too, sometimes, with
Hmm.
men mostly, sensitivity and awareness. Like this extends
Hmm.
beyond men's work too. Like when I'm working
Hmm.
with in the relationship field,
Right.
often it's like, okay, like, are you aware? Right. And are you sensitive?
Hmm.
And if you can start to kind of get those things,
Hmm.
life starts to change as you
Right.
become more aware and then you're actually sensitive enough. And certainly that's been the case for me. Like the more aware and the more sensitive I've gotten, the more life has opened up.
Hmm.
Not always in the everything feels great.
Yeah.
Opened up a lot of really negative, not negative, opened up really
Yeah.
a lot of feelings I
Challenging
would have
growth
not, I'd rather
opportunities.
not feel. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
sensitivity and awareness
Mhm.
and um, I think those are two, like if I really had to choose a couple things to teach on, if someone
Yeah.
made me choose a couple for the rest of my life, I think I could teach on those for
Yeah.
probably forever without
Mm.
without figuring them out or, I'll probably die trying to figure those things out.
Yeah. 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 I
Yeah.
mean, boy, what useful, I mean, just beyond how you show up in the world and how people feel around you, but the ability to connect. Because I think as human beings, that's the one thing that our ultimate desire is to connect with other human beings. But our egos and defense mechanisms, all those things
Yeah.
get in the way of actual connection. And then the result is we walk around feeling like we're alone. And to
Yeah.
move past that in the courageous way of like, okay, I'm going to like take a risk here and look in somebody else's eyes and feel not what I'm feeling, but try to feel what's coming
Yeah.
from them. That's a
Yeah.
that's a big ask for some people.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. It is. And, societally, there's not a lot of support
Yep.
for that. We want to really understand where people are at. And I
Hmm.
do think that's a critically important piece. Like I think that whole realm of therapy is so
Hmm.
important to have people really see that and experience the being seen. Like
Hmm.
you're not you're not crazy for thinking that. And
Yeah.
right, like those. I mean, it's such a I mean, Paul. I know Paul Conti talks about this at length, but I remember I heard him being interviewed. Um, he was talking about it's like yeah, probably the most valuable part of therapy is being validated. Like you're not crazy because
Hmm.
so many of us, myself
Yeah.
included, think, oh, like I'm insane for thinking
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
And
Yep.
we even label it as insane, which is also, dangerous. But
Hmm.
that I think is another um, important piece. But I think it has to go beyond that.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it can't end at just the mental map of being
Hmm.
seen.
Hmm. Yeah. It actually has to be felt on a soul level. Yeah. That
Just body
depth
to body, man. I
in
mean,
body. Yeah.
we can go to the soul level too. I mean, I love going into these deeper realms, but I'm just
Yeah.
thinking about some of the listener base here too. Like,
Hmm.
it's not just in the ethers.
Right. Right.
It's also right here in the here and now in the physical body. And I
Hmm.
think a lot of us, myself included, had kind of shut that part of themselves off, right?
Hmm. Yeah. What did you even think about like somebody puts their hand on your shoulder? You know, there's a completely different awareness that
Yeah,
you bring into that situation. And there's a different energy level that happens. And
yeah,
one of the things I'm loving about the embodiment work that we're doing is you have to break through the resistance to allow yourself to just feel safe enough with another man to be able to feel him, just the physical presence of him. Right? That breaking through that barrier is such a huge thing to be able then to bring that into my relationship. And
Yeah, it's true. It is, I think another important piece of men's work. And, it's not an easy sell out of the gates for a lot of guys that like, hey, it's possible that these men could love you and you could love them. And
Mhm.
nobody has to exchange bodily fluid or
Yeah.
be labeled. Like you can just
Yeah.
actually experience love. And, it took me a long time to get there too, man. It wasn't like that.
Mhm.
My first men's group, I was like, oh, love. It's like, oh, there's dudes here. Like,
Yeah.
oh, right. So
Uh-huh.
but again, you practice it enough
Yeah.
and it starts to become a trait that you actually have now installed in the body. And I can't think of more important work for men to be doing in the
Mhm.
world, not just for
Mhm.
themselves, but for their children, their partners, for the people that they come into contact with every day.
Mhm.
Um, because so many of us have been so desensitized. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Travis, thank you so much for your time today. This has been awesome. I know that the people that watch us are going to get a lot out of it. Um, Somebody wanted to get in contact with you, how would they do that?
They would, well, they would not go to social media. It's not my thing at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you know that. They would go online to my website and they would find me at travisstreb.com. So it's Travis and then Streb is STREB.com. And they'll find out a lot more about me. They'd find out about the programs I run for men, for couples, and for leaders in organizations. And
Mhm.
um, my the people I work with keep telling me that social media is coming, but I don't know if it's coming from me just yet. But you can certainly get on my mailing list, which is also another great way to take part in the community. And if you happen to be so lucky as to live in North Vancouver or in the Lower Mainland, I run an in-person men's group that is by donation for the BC Children's Hospital Foundation for mental health. And so we get together once a month and we're always taking in new men. So if that's something that's up your alley and you're in this exact realm, then that's also open. So
Well, thanks so much. Big love to you. And guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, share this video. I think it'll be helpful and impactful for a lot of men.
yeah, thank you, Chuck. It's been great to
Thank
be on here
you.
today, man.